It's that time again, boys and babes. It's the Magic Hour, a place where we navigate through life's peaks and valleys with all the vulnerability and shamelessness we can muster. With the help of world-class guests from all walks of life, we uncover new truths and valuable tools for manifesting our highest potential. I'm your host, Mercedes Terrell, along with my partner in shine, Jade Bryce.
Hey, you guys.
And real quick, guys, before we get into the show, I want to talk to the fellas listening to make it known that the days of tricking women into bed with you are so 10 years ago, guys. No longer are independent women of today's age looking for the man who can pay all the bills and buy them a fancy car. Guys, the queens of today want to be seen as an equal and empowered by a man who is seated firmly in his throne as a true king, as we like to call it. And we're here to show you the way to become genuinely, undeniably attractive as a king would. We're offering a unique guide for your journey to the throne, so to speak, so that you can finally show up in this world as an awakened king.
Yes, and this journey is one we've helped countless men venture, including our very own romantic partners, and we've witnessed the power of our uncommon methods dramatically change the lives of the men in our sphere.
Sorry, I didn't know you were in there. Yeah, guys, many of the men we've worked with have tried the old ways of forcing themselves into, the stereotypical image of masculine success, quote unquote, or becoming the nice guy even that gets friend zoned and dismissed or looked over. With our exclusive proven approach, men just like you listening right now have, if they've been courageous enough anyway to enter this process, they've found themselves in alignment with their truth and steadfast in their direction, full of confidence and purpose. And I know, fellas, that is what us ladies are looking for in a man. So
yes. So I invite you to join our workshop at awakeningkings.com. If you're ready to show up for yourself, call in your queen, and know how to be the king she's been waiting for when you do.
Yes. All right, Jade. So on with the show. What do you have planned for our magic mobbers today?
Yeah, this year has been a really rough one for me so far. And the way I get through tough times is finding something to look forward to. Kind of like when you're doing cardio and you tell yourself just to make it to that house or that fire hydrant or whatever it is. Well, today's episode was one of those things for me. I have been looking forward to interviewing our guest today ever since I met him at a friend's Christmas party last year.
Yeah. And his Instagram account, by the way, has been such a light in my life. I feel like we really get to know our guests through their Instagram accounts a lot of the time. That's the beautiful thing about social media. It can be used for the good. And the work he does with men gives me so much hope, especially for our own workshop, because we've used so much of that influence there. And I know we have so much we want to cover with him. So let's not delay any further, Jade. Let's get him on.
Okay. Our guest today has been immersed in deep men's empowerment work and the exploration of intimate and sacred relationships, merging the best of Eastern and Western methodologies and philosophies to promote balance, sacredness, and power in life and love. He describes himself as a relational alchemist, international speaker, and author who facilitates transformational growth through using integrative techniques and methods such as neural empowerment, shamanic praxis, holotropic and biodynamic breathwork, trauma release and integration, Western psychology, Eastern mysticism, and more. He has created programs, models, and systems to enhance the quality of your life, your intimate relationships, and in essence, bring you closer to your potential. Having also traversed the depths of his own pain, suicidal thoughts, and fears profoundly, he pioneers the way for other men to step into sacred masculinity. We are so honored to know this man and to have him on the show today. Please help us welcome Stefanos Sifandos to the Magic Hour.
All right.
Okay. Please help us welcome Stefanos Sifandos to the Magic Hour.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited.
Yeah, we discussed it a little bit at the top of the show, but we are so excited to have you here. We're huge fans. And of course, we're always throwing your Instagram posts back and forth to each other and to our romantic partners. So glad to have you here. And I want to just start off with you with really getting your story of how you got to be, the man you are today. And I know that's a big question. So maybe you can give us just the highs and lows of what led you to doing men's work and to working what you do now with your wife. Yeah, hit the highs and lows with us. I know you're pretty good at telling your story already, so I probably don't need to walk you into that so much.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think with most of us, our stories or the places that we find ourselves in when we are or do feel that we're in a place of empowerment, it generally comes from pain or suffering or having transcended through some aspect of self that has just been extremely challenging. And there's degrees of that, right? There's shades of challenge and difficulty and pain and all of that. But ultimately, it's breaking through an older version of self to get into this new or current version of self. And so I remember Dr. John Demartini saying that our voids become our values. And so for me as a kid, I felt very isolated and very alone, and I experienced a lot of abuse and violence and volatility in my household from the people that I loved and cared about and that were meant to love and care about me and look after me. And so there was a lot of confusion growing up as well. And I took that energy and that anger and that aggression that was suppressed and the fear, and I brought that into my teenage years, into raging hormones, into my early adulthood, became very aggressive and violent myself, had broken relationships, cheating, unfaithful, prostitution, alcoholism, getting involved with not healthy people and groups of people, doing adrenaline spiked activities. And I don't just mean jumping out of planes, but really getting involved in the darker side of society and exposing myself to what most people probably don't experience in life, and gangs and so forth and everything that comes with that. And I was just living this very confused life. But on the surface, it didn't appear that way because I was holding it together. I was
Mm,
wearing so many different masks to keep me in check and to make everyone think that I've got this. I'm okay. I'm exactly where I need to be. Everything's good. Nothing's wrong with me. Including pretending I had way more money than I did, or defining my self-worth by status and the people I spent time with and the things that I would do and the risks that I would take, and how many women could I sleep with and be with, and
mm,
all of that. And I was spiraling out of control. And then a number of years ago, the partner that I was with at the time found out that I was unfaithful in that relationship, and that really became a catalyst for transformation and change for me. Just watching and seeing her pain and the shame that brought up in me and all of the suppressed trauma, and really just taking a very, very hard look at who I was being in the world and how I was being, and really realizing that I just can't continue this life. And I was just I was scared. I was scared. I was a little boy trapped in an adult's body, in a man's body, and I hadn't dealt with my past trauma and my past shit. And I was either going to ignore that and continue the path that I was on, which would have ended up, I don't think, in a very healthy place at all, if even alive, because I was battling with demons every day, fighting them. I needed more and more pleasure, short-term intense gratification, and sex and pornography and all of that was my go-to, and adrenaline, doing things that were either illegal or doing things that were against the grain to feel something but ultimately to avoid that pain that I had been avoiding for so long. And so that had to stop, and I had to then face all of that. And that was an immense and intense rite of passage that really went over a number of years. And where I am today is a product of that, but is a product of choosing every day or every moment that new version of me that was very possible, that I had been ignoring, which is ultimately the real version of me for so long.
mm. God, there's so many directions that I would love to dig in deeper with you on that, but I want to keep us on topic because I know we have some limited time today. Um, but that story of like when you're digging into, when you're looking at the darkest places of yourself without looking. So like, how do I want to say this? When you were going through your earlier life and you were dealing in places that just you shouldn't have been, and wearing a mask you wasn't fit for you, creates the shame that you're already running from, right? And we get stuck in this shame cycle. I know that's something, one of the main points that you work on with people is really figuring out how to identify and then dissolve shame. So maybe you can speak on how we get stuck in the shame cycle in the first place and how we get out of it.
Well, both are challenging. So we get into the shame cycle in often challenging ways, and getting out of it is often challenging as well. And for me personally, when I spiral, and I still often at times do and have spiraled into shame cycles, it has always been a way of shutting the world out and protecting myself. And a lot has to happen for us to go into those shame cycles. We either have to interpret or perceive or actually experience immense amounts of pain or fear or abuse or violation of the self or the breaking of trust, that then moves us into shame, that at times can act as a defense mechanism to protect us from the outside world. And because we become so insular and so introverted. And so in that, for me, shame compounds shame. So I'll feel that I am wrong. I will make myself wrong. I will find all the reasons and all the ways why I am wrong. And sometimes it's a very convoluted, confused cluster of emotions, right? And part of that is I'm making myself wrong so I don't make others wrong, so I don't get, my nervous system doesn't want to get pulled out of the in-group, but I'm suffering. And at that point, I've got so much energy, so much stuck energy in me that it has to come out. So then I get aggressive, and then I get abrasive and angry and volatile. And so I'm just playing out familiar patterns that I experienced through my father and my mother's dynamic, and how they were with me and how they were with each other. And at that point, it's just spiraling. It's almost out of control. Yes, I can have control over it, but there's an element where I don't have control. Now, these days, I have far more mastery over it and awareness, and I have techniques, whether it's breath techniques or mindfulness techniques or somatic techniques, movement techniques, whatever it may be, that can bring me out of that shame cycle and bring me into a healthier place within. But then getting out of the shame cycle, it's really simple to understand, but really difficult to execute upon, because many of us haven't experienced this in our lives. Some have, of course, but many of us haven't. It's meeting ourselves with non-judgment, compassion, loving presence, and empathetic resonance. And that means that we're kind to ourselves. We're accepting of where we're at. We're not berating ourselves. Our self-talk isn't abrasive and harsh, but also not just extending that beyond ourselves, and not just within ourselves, but also being surrounded by people that can see us. Having those fundamental human needs met, being seen, being heard, being understood, being accepted, being appreciated, being loved, right? Having people around us that can do that for us when they see us in those shame cycles, they see us shutting down, they see us isolating, they see us not loving ourselves and being really harsh with ourselves. We need people around us that can do that, whether it's a counselor, a psychologist, a group of friends, a family member, a sister circle that you go to, a men's group that you go to, whatever it may be. We need those people around us to help us shift those same shame cycles, so that they can help us see the forest through the trees, because we'll often revert to those shame cycles because we think it's keeping us safe, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say there's a branch of this that I've heard you speak on, and it comes up with that worthiness wound thing. And I actually have a quote from you where you say, I think you're speaking from someone who's coming from that inner child place where they're still acting through their shame and fear. And you say, I can act my worst and people still love me. So that validates that I'm still lovable. If we act as our lower self and our partner still loves us, then we think we must be lovable instead of being in our own self-love and so forth. And that being a worthiness wound.
I think I paraphrased that from another episode I heard you on. But that was a pattern I saw in my own life for sure. Yeah. I wanted to talk about the importance of men looking at and healing their mother wounds. And I'm sure this is something that you work with in men. I'm not sure if it's particular to mother wounds and not father wounds, but I wanted to touch on that with you.
Sure.
Yeah. So how do they begin to look at that, and how do they begin to heal it?
How do men heal the mother wound?
And begin to recognize that it's there.
One of the ways that we can recognize that there is a mother wound there, where and there's many components to the mother wound, or there's many aspects and extensions of it, and part of that can be, we can look at, there's been a lack of nurturing care, where the man hasn't experienced, that boy hasn't experienced nurturing care from the mother. There's an enmeshment and an entanglement with mother, which means that mother's emotional needs were projected onto that little boy, and that little boy ultimately became a surrogate husband to the mother. And these are unconscious projections, right? These are psychosocial, psycho-relational dynamics that play out because the mother's feeling a lot of pressure. Her husband, the boy's father's unavailable, whether physically, emotionally, both, or he's abusive, or they're just disconnected in their relationship, and those needs are then projected onto that little boy. And then there's other dynamics, like, is that boy the youngest child, the eldest child? There's other plays out fact there. But then what that man can notice, and so wow, I have a mother wound, is how is he treating himself when he's in relationship with women? And how is he allowing women to treat him? And what type of relationships is he attracting? Is he attracting a relationship that reminds him of his mother? Is he wanting his partners to mother him, per se? Is he entangled, codependent with his partners? Noticing these things is very important. Does he have a hate for women because his mother was never there for him, and therefore he uses women as objects and abuses women in different ways, manipulates women? And we can start to notice these patterns in our lives, like going into the relationships. Like, let me look back at all the relationships. Are there any noticeable patterns there? I'm the common denominator. Let me look at that. That's where we have to start as men, right? If we're wanting to be self-aware, we have to start with our own lives. So looking at those patterns can be very, very useful.
Yeah. And something that I had told our couples therapist last week, and he said, I don't have a couple that hasn't said this before, was that like often a complaint from a woman is that like she'll tell a man something that's like very, it can be very effective for his life or very powerful. And then like 3 weeks later, he'll say like, oh man, at men's group tonight, I heard this from one of my brothers, and it just really resonated with me. And it can be verbatim what she said like 3 weeks ago, but it just didn't have that effect on him. Do you think that that is part of the mother wound as well? Like trusting that a woman can like speak truth into your life?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. If mistrust has been broken in the child-mother relationship, where the mother's been unavailable, maybe she's been going through her own depression, or she has a personality disorder, or she's had to step into this hyper masculine role because the father's been away. So she's had to caretake and provide and be absent herself because she's got to meet basic economic needs and so forth. There can be that, well, I can't trust my mother, therefore I can't trust women. There's that projection. And it works both ways, right? Like when women experience sometimes that father wound of that unavailable man, it's like, well, now all men are unavailable, and I will attract all the unavailable men into my life, A, because it's familiar, and B, because there's a part of me that wants to rectify or redo that relationship and re-engineer that story within. But the issue is that we don't know that story exists, so we just keep attracting the same stories. And it's the same with men here. And so that mistrust then is projected onto that relationship, and there's no vulnerability. And now there's no vulnerability in the relationship. There's no sharing. Now that woman feels cut off. And now, depending on what her wounding is, if she has for example, a codependent or insecure attachment style, she's going to latch on even more, and she's going to compromise herself and minimize herself and do less for herself and more for him, which at some point he's going to see, what game is she playing now? Because he doesn't trust women. So it's just reinforcing his mistrust. So then he's going to react in response to that. And so there's this domino effect, and this cycle that's just whirling down in a descent into the shadow, without being deliberate about that descent. And it's wreaking havoc.
Absolutely. God, that makes it so, it highlights how important it is to work with other men if you're a man, or work with other women if you're a woman and you're having these unconscious wounds that you haven't dealt with, that's a great way to like at least get it reflected back to you by someone who you could hold the truth of, like a man speaking to a man. And then through your common experiences and sharing those openly and vulnerably, getting to a place where you go, maybe I need to look at something that would release that resistance to holding what my romantic partner, my woman, says is truth, or, allowing her to be the oracle that she can be if you get there. Yeah. Men's work, men with men, for sure. Brotherhood is so important.
So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about how we can access parts of our subconscious through breath work. I know you and your wife, a lot of what I've heard you guys talk about is holotropic breath work. I'm not sure if there's other types that you guys work with, but I wanted to go into that, how we can access parts of our subconscious through that, how we're able to do that, what methods there are, things like that.
Yeah, so I use a combination of breath technique. It's holotropic, biodynamic, transformational, rebirthing, and then, over the years it's not so much developed my own technique. It's more the way the sessions are conducted or the space that's being held. And as more I do more research into breath science and the power of breath and what that can access, there's a lot that we don't know, to be very honest. I can't necessarily give you a scientific or physiological explanation as to why or how the breath very specifically accesses unconscious parts of ourselves. I mean, I can, but so for example, an explanation could be this: is that a particular breath technique places our physiology in such a state that it can and this is why it's so imperative that there are safety precautions in place. The contraindications are really explained. I treat breath work like a plant medicine ceremony. If I'm conducting breath work, I do not fuck around with it. It can be very intense. The benefits of a breathwork session is that person, once you've built that rapport and trust with them, and they allow themselves to submit to the experience and surrender to the experience, they're in control. So if it ever gets too intense, they can shut it down very quickly by simply changing their breath technique, doing a number of different very quick things that within seconds to minutes will get them into a more familiar state again. Whereas with plant medicine, if you're in it, you've got to wait until the medicine wears off, right? The sacrament wears off. So it's very powerful, yet also very accessible. And so I think one of the reasons why we're able to access either unconscious memories or trapped emotions is because the breath literally changes our physiological state and the way that our molecular cellular selves are expressing. And it also can resemble a very traumatic time, and it gives us an opportunity to complete that trauma loop that we didn't get to complete at the time of or times of experiencing certain traumas and pains. Now, that can be super useful and it can be super scary as well. And we don't want people to relive trauma. That's the last thing that we want to do. We just want to be able to complete the feeling cycle of those feelings that weren't felt. And so breath can access that. Specific breath techniques can access that. Also, the way that the carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen levels are changing in the body, again, has an effect on our nervous system and what moves us into the parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system. Then accompanying that with the knowledge that we're safe in the space that we're in and we're very deliberate with where we're taking ourselves, there can be this almost paradoxical exploration of this unsafe aspect of self, but being in a safe environment. Because again, remember what I said earlier about meeting people with non-judgment and compassion. That's essentially creating a safe environment. So if one's neuroception, the way our nervous system perceives the world, unconscious to us, it's just doing it on an unconscious, just scanning the environment. The brain and body are scanning the environment through the enteric system and through the vagus nerve that's feeding information to the brain and so forth and telling us that we're safe. There's an element of us that knows we're safe, yet our body's feeling unsafe. And that paradox is that there's an intersection there where we can complete that cycle of trauma, complete that loop, and it can feel very empowering and very relieving for us. And so that's some of the benefits of working with pain and trying to shift pain and trauma through breath work.
Is that So I purchased on your site or your wife's site, I'm not sure which one, like a 10 series of breath work. Is
Yep.
that the type of breath work that you're talking about?
Yeah, it can be. There's various techniques in that series. Literally there'd be not necessarily 10 different techniques, but close to. There's some different techniques to elicit different responses. And
Mm-hmm.
each of those techniques are very specific to emotions and the activation and release of those emotions, or the activation of those emotions and the release of those trapped emotions as well. But yes, there's some of the techniques that I would use for sure.
It's
Do you
so
feel that? Do you feel that with psychedelics that psychedelics could almost be re-traumatization, like you said?
Yes.
And then,
Yes.
like, do you feel that when we relive trauma on psychedelics, there could be re-traumatization, but do you think that there may be rewiring of the brain towards that trauma? Or do you think that there's almost the integration is harder after because it's almost like you revisited it in a different way than when it's on breath work?
It depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes and no. It depends on the individual and depends on so many factors: the environment, the medicine, where
Mm-hmm.
that person is. I'm an avid um, journeyer
near
of yeah
psychonaut. Yeah.
yeah. I'm a psychonaut. I have
Uh-huh.
no issues going there, and I want to be very clear that the first um, ceremony and first sacrament journey that I went down, I had done a fair amount of shadow work and shadow exploration in familiar states of consciousness first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is very necessary in today's world when it comes to plant medicine. There are too many irresponsible people stating and claiming that they're shamans, and they're not. And we also, in addition to that, we also live in a very different world, not
Mm-hmm.
only biophysically in terms of the toxins and pollutants in our atmospheres and waterways and soils and so forth that's affecting our physiology, but also the complexity of our psyche as well.
Mm-hmm.
The impoverishment that we're experiencing, just the disparity in socioeconomic culture and the values that we share. It's very different to what it was a few thousand years ago,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of years ago even. And so we have to take all of these factors into account, and it's really, really important. Again, the complexity of family dynamics, that we are really able to explore our own consciousness in familiar states of consciousness and awareness
Mm-hmm.
first, which is this,
Yeah.
right? This is familiar.
Mhm.
We're not, most people aren't microdosing or dosing LSD, and LSD is not a plant medicine, obviously, but, or psilocybin and whatnot on a daily basis. This is a familiar state of consciousness. So working with our emotions and the
Mm-hmm.
intensity of our own lives and histories
Mhm.
in this state of consciousness as a foundation before moving to more,
Aggressive.
uh, more aggressive techniques, more
Mm-hmm.
intense techniques and peak experiences can be very useful for not only managing that, but it's less about the management. It's more about actually getting the benefit and the integration
Yeah.
from that.
Have you ever, oh, sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, there's a sense of autonomy when it comes to like doing breath work that you can access at any time,
Correct.
right? To be able to do that, as opposed to plant medicine where it is very ritual and ceremonial, and it has its place. Absolutely. Like you're saying, I do believe myself. But like you're saying, having that safe place that you can create for yourself, however that looks, I think is really critical, because we do want to sometimes in this culture take the silver, well, or the silver, the silver bullet, I guess, or take the magic pill is what I meant to say, in order to just, okay, well, I'll just jump to that and fix it. A sense of bypassing. I feel like that also happens there for a lot of people if they don't come at it with the reverence,
Mm-hmm.
or even, if they don't come at doing a plant medicine ceremony with the reverence, for sure. But even the breath work, like you're saying, you could have, like some sort of Kundalini awakening, some
Yeah,
stuff can come up, inner child stuff that you're not ready for because
massively.
you're not doing it in a safer environment for that. Yeah, that makes sense to me, though, that having a modality that you can access at any time, including not just breath work, but even just a coach, a therapist, a men's group, if you're a man listening to this, a women's group, to explore those places where people are going to be able to hold you and say, like, oh, don't worry, we've seen this before. You're not alone. You're not going crazy, per se, or you might be for a little bit. We could bring you back online.
And I'm
Yeah.
curious, with breath work, I know like The Body Keeps the Score, and I think it's called Waking the Tiger is the other trauma book. With breath work, do you ever see people maybe have some tremors or shaking to release the trauma?
Yes.
And I know you've talked about too, how powerful sometimes screaming can be. And I was curious because you mentioned, Mercedes and I are really into dreams and dream journaling. You mentioned that if you're having dreams where you're trying to scream while attack and no sound is coming out, that it's maybe a repressed sense of self. I often have dreams that when I'm attacked, I'm trying to punch the person to defend myself, and there's no strength in my arm, and it's like a limp, noodle hitting the person. So do you think that's the same thing, a repressed sense of self?
It can be, and I very much have had those dreams in the past as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be a repressed sense of self. It's a part of us that, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine the other day, and he's an amazing dream interpreter as well. And we were talking about that and some other aspects of a dream that I had, and I didn't have that dream this time, but I've had those dreams before. And it could be, I mean, dream interpretation is so broad, so broad.
It's so individual.
Yeah. We're constantly going to Eric Gotzi asking him.
Well, that's who I was speaking with the other day. With Eric.
Yeah.
And so the issue with that is, though, there are so many lineages of dream interpretation, whether it's Vedic, whether it's Western psychology, every different tribe, back throughout history will have their own way of interpreting dreams and what they actually mean. Then there's what's happening in the brain and how the brain is processing the day's events in symbolism and in a different way to be palatable to the mind that's not so extreme as well. There's so many, we still don't, from a scientific medical science perspective, we don't really know completely why dreams unravel. We have some theories, right? But they're not quote unquote concrete. I prefer to go to ancient wisdom and ancient culture anyway for that, from a personal perspective. But yeah, those dreams where you're not making impact, where you're trying to hit or hurt someone or defend yourself, but you can't, that could very well mean that there's a place within yourself that you're not speaking your truth or vocalizing or expressing or being your authentic self. It could mean that you're feeling powerless, or your power is being taken away from you in certain areas of life. And look, you can start there. And if that is true for you, great. You can look at that and say, well, a more desirable place for me to be, because it's all about desirability and undesirability. A more desirable place for me is to be in my power. How can I be in that in the most healthy way? And so the dream acts as a symbol, as a signpost to take you there. And it's a process and a journey too. It may take you elsewhere, and that's okay. But you can always start there. Start with a framework that has been established, whether it's Jung's idea of dream interpretation, or whether it's a Vedic perspective, whatever it may be. Start somewhere, and at least that way you're cultivating a deeper sense of self-awareness.
Yeah, you're just bringing up those things that your subconscious is trying to show you and making sense to it. It only has to make sense to you at the end of the day. I do want to ask you though about that sympathetic nervous response of that shaking and that tremoring that can happen when we've experienced trauma, and that needs to move through our body still. And I've heard you articulate it so well, just like what happens in our mind and body really, and creates that type of response to having even a past trauma that finally we're bringing back online.
Yeah. So when we register experiences, we register them in the mind-brain complex, but also in the brain-body complex, right? So particularly very intense experiences, they're registered in our nervous systems, and namely to protect us. So we can notice, because the brain is a pattern recognizing machine. And so that we can notice familiar aspects of that experience again, so that we can avoid it or keep ourselves safe, fight or flight, essentially, right? At some level. And so when we're shaking or tremoring, and what often happens in so many people that are dealing with trauma, whether it's current, whether they've just had a car accident, or they've just come out of a war-torn country, or they've just experienced a divorce or sexual abuse, or whether it's old stuff from when they were children, that body is registering that traumatic event as well. And it's usually locking it in and locking it away. And so you mentioned, Waking the Tiger Within, and Dr. Peter Levine, in his story of how he started unpacking his own trauma and unpacking how we can actually deal with trauma in a healthy way, was he was explaining that he was walking and it was a beautiful sunny day and he was going to his friend's birthday and he got hit by a car. And I'm going to give you the condensed version, right?
Sure.
And so that's a traumatic event, of course. And so in that, he'd done enough work and he understood enough around trauma that he needed to shake and move, because that's what the body just wanted to do. It wanted to release all the adrenaline, the neurochemicals that had been moved through the body. He didn't want them to stay stagnant and stuck in the body. But when the medical personnel arrived, they were trying to keep him rigid and locked in. And this is part of the, nothing wrong with Western medicine. It has its flaws like so many other modalities, right? But this is one of the flaws of Western medicine, is we're very restrictive, and that's very rigid in terms of the body needs to move, the body needs to release that trauma. For example, if you're a child and you've experienced physical abuse and or sexual abuse and you're absolutely scared, you brace and you freeze, and everything is frozen and you're trying to disassociate from your body, but these things are still happening to your body, whether it's sexual abuse or whether it's physical abuse, or even if it's words penetrating your heart. And so it becomes imperative that we're able to move that energy, because if the trauma loop isn't complete, and part of the completion cycle is moving the energy, physically moving the energy through the body, then that trauma is going to keep replaying itself in your body unconsciously and sometimes consciously. When a deer escapes a leopard that is hunting it, it will find a safe place, go there and shudder and tremble and shudder and tremble until it releases what it needs to. And then it just simply gets up as if nothing happened. It is done with that. It's completed the cycle. It's over with. Doesn't need to continue. We have the blessing and the curse of a prefrontal cortex that's very adaptive and also overthinks and wants to make meaning out of everything. And one of the ways that we think keeps us most safe, which in part is true, but in part isn't completely true, is that we can think our way out of everything. And that's not the case, because that's not how we register trauma. It's not just in the thinking brain. It's also in the body. And so part of it becomes shutting down the prefrontal cortex and needing to quote unquote understand, and more about just getting in the body and somatic release techniques. Soma is the Greek word for body. So somatic, so body-based techniques that can really, breath is one of them, that can really release the trauma and complete the loop.
Yeah. God, that makes so much sense. And even with simple modalities like ecstatic dance, or just turning on your own radio and dancing, or just so that it gets you to get up and move stuff as your body feels free to do it, however it needs to do it, or getting on the mat and just rolling and stretching and doing whatever comes up naturally, allowing that with intention to just like move out whatever needs to be moved out. So powerful. So I want to discuss with you sacred sexuality, because this is such a beautiful place that it seems like you and your wife play with when we've listened to your podcasts that you've done with other people. And I know you guys are teaching this information to people now. So I don't know how to break into this, but maybe like how can we have sex in a way that gets us into these altered states of consciousness, into that delicious realm that we all want to get to?
I've heard you talk about, and I've experienced it before with my current partner, that there's times where you could have sex in a way where you feel like you're like on MDMA or something. So can you talk about maybe ways to bring that into your intimacy?
Yeah. So it begins with trust. You have to be able to do your own inner work first and clear as much of your pain and struggle as you can, many of your inhibitions and your vulnerabilities that you're hiding from, the pains and the fears and the traumas that you have, and cultivating a sense of consistent trust in your relationship with your partner. That ultimately opens up the door to experiencing a shared sexuality where it does feel like you're cosmically traveling, or it does feel like you're on MDMA, or whatever it may be. One of the ways, or some of the ways that we can build trust, is being transparent with each other. Yes, date nights are great, but having weekly or daily check-ins where you're sharing with each other. It doesn't have to be heavy sharing. It just be open, vulnerable sharing. Find those places within that are a little uncomfortable and purposely, deliberately go there with your partner. practice non-judgment and compassion with your partner. And so if they're bringing something to you that is heavy for you, maybe be honest with how that's reflecting on you, and be honest with, can you hold that right now or can't you? Because often we don't want to let our partners down. And so we try and hold this immense space for them when we can't, and we end up causing more harm than good, because they then feel they can't trust us. We're not honoring ourselves. And it's just intense, right? It just becomes intense. And so being very proactive in how we treat each other is very, very important, and how we cultivate trust. That then immediately lays a foundation and transcends into sexuality and sexual exploration with each other. Sharing fantasies with each other, being really honest about that. Again, this can be really hard because there's fears of rejection and abandonment and humiliation that comes up. I don't want to share what my fantasy is, or I don't want to share what I want to explore sexually, or what my needs are, because you may get upset, or I may upset you, and that's going to hurt me, or you may tease me, or you may not accept that. And so we have to begin to move beyond these fears. And so start small, start sharing with your partner things that don't carry such a high risk. Sexuality can be very vulnerable and raw and open and scary in that sense. And so if you want to create transcendental sexual experiences, you have to be really honest with where you're at, what you want, what you desire, and what you're able to also give as well. And so that then, you keep peeling that back. It's self-awareness. It's doing your own inner work. When you both bring that to the relationship can grow, and you can grow together, and you can do your work together as well. And work is just another word for exploration. That's really what it is. It's a clearing, right? Like, we're trying to create spaciousness in our lives, in our beings, in our bodies, in our souls, in our relationships, because it's in that spaciousness that we're able to explore with a greater sense of safety. So if you don't help your partner feel safe with how they need to feel safe, there's some fundamental stuff like be consistent in your behavior, don't be volatile, meet your partner's needs, meet each other's needs, create a sense of safety, trust, don't lie, be honest. The more you're able to create safety, the more you're able to go to these exotic places within your relationship that may feel very foreign, but will feel safe enough for you to explore, which, pushes the edges. Like in trauma work, we have a window of tolerance, and we have an edging exercise where you're just edging very safely. You're taking yourself to your trauma, but then you're pulling back, grounding and anchoring, and you're constantly doing that, or regularly doing that, where your edge is getting wider and wider, bigger and bigger. It's the same with a relationship. Build that trust, keep building. That's going to be super useful.
God, yeah, that's so important. And when you think about, we end up getting back in the same type of relationships over and over, and calling in the same people when we're not healing our wounds and doing our inner work, then we don't ever really get the chance to create that foundation in order to then go on the exploration of what is next and what's the full spectrum, ability that we get during this one very short life.
Yeah. And some people may mistake what we're talking about for that like beginning chemistry. Like, oh, I felt that like in that very beginning, but what we're talking about too, like can be had 10 years into a relationship when this work is done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now this is a bit of a shift, but we know that the numbers of sexual assault with women is very high. And I've heard you talk about like 6 or 7 out of 10 men in your workshops have also had sexual abuse. So I want to know, from your experience there, why do you think that we don't talk much about sexual abuse in men in the first place in our culture? I mean, there might be some obvious answers, but with your own personal experience there, and how do we help men move into a space that they can be held there?
Yeah. And I'm also curious, possibly, if I know the men in my life, if I've asked them if they've had sexual abuse, they honestly answer that they don't remember. And I'm curious why maybe men, it becomes like a repressed memory more so than women. Yeah. If that's true.
That's a human construct more than anything else. We repress because it's a defense strategy. It's a coping strategy. We suppress because it's too intense to deal with at the time. I mean, a child being raped, or being molested or sexually abused or being violated or being taken advantage of is very intense for that child's very young, depending on the age, underdeveloped or very immature nervous system. And so suppressing that memory and shutting off that part and disassociation occurring in the body is very natural and normal. It's the body doing what it needs to do to survive. unfortunately, that pattern becomes a habit and a norm. And so we'll tend to disassociate in any area of life that's difficult, or if we're having a hard time at work, or if we're having an argument in our relationship, or if we lost a running race, or, we just start to disassociate. And so we start to numb. And so maybe we go to drugs, maybe we go to alcohol, whatever it may be. And so we develop these patterns off those foundations, and that's a human construct. Anecdotally, in the workshops that I've conducted, and I've conducted many, I'd say it's at least 5 to 6 men that have experienced it, that are claiming to have experienced sexual abuse of some sort. And when I say claiming, it's their truth being spoken. I can't verify that, of course, but I can verify it from what they're saying. I can't verify whether that's actually happened or not.
Right.
But I would believe that to be true. Statistically, empirically, what the evidence is, it's less than that. But we also know that statistics can be skewed, and there are many variables that feed into the accuracy of statistics. But again, anecdotally, through the workshops that I've experienced, 5 or 6 men, and often 7 to 8 women. It depends. It varies, of course. But yeah, there's some intensity to that, right? And so, how do men begin to heal from sexual abuse? Well, let me go to answer your question as to why. Why is it more taboo for men to be sexually abused or to speak about their sexual abuse? Very simply put, we live in a culture of, you're a boy, don't cry. Big boys don't cry. I mean, that sort of sums it up to some degree. Sure. There's a shame that comes from that. Like, men are meant to be tough. Boys are meant to be tough. They're not meant to, this is not meant to happen to them. There's no real outlet for them to do that. It's mainly the perpetrators of sexual abuse are mainly men. Mm-hmm. And there's just a deep shame that comes from a man molesting or hurting sexually a boy as well. There's also then a deep mistrust that comes in that man, and he's not taught how to really emote. And so not only is he not taught how to emote, the shame around expression, there's also, I can't trust anyone. Mm-hmm. If I was hurt by my older brother or my parish priest or my father or the babysitter, or, who can I really, really trust? I can't trust anyone.
Or yourself at that.
Or self, that's right. Yeah. And so it becomes very, very difficult for a man to express in that way. Where we can support men that have experienced sexual abuse, I'm just going to come back to the simplicity of what I said earlier, compassion and non-judgment. Mm-hmm. That is going to create the safety, because safety is the healing. Yeah. And in that safety, it is non-judgment and compassion that's going to continued compassion, the application of patience and so forth, that's really going to help that man break free of that trauma, speak to it more openly, be more in touch with it, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's it's such a sensitive thing for anyone to talk about. And I do believe men are even more repressed in that, like you're saying, in our culture, they just already have this layer of shame that they have to try to break through to even touch that topic at all. So creating these safe spaces is so important. I do want to ask you, before we jump into our little lightning round here, you said something about not everything needing to be a process and not everything needs to be turned into spiritual work. So maybe you can just touch on what you feel about that.
Yeah, just have fun, play, create spaciousness in your world. The source of all activity is from passivity. So we can't always be in our stuff. We can't always be in a fucking process, in a plant ceremony journey. We can't always be doing the breath work. We can't always be doing the journey. Like you can, like it's okay, but careful you just don't become addicted to the process, and you don't become addicted to having to do something, or the only way that you're going to see yourself as someone that's worthy is when you're doing the work and you're applying the effort. Part of that is also being able to pull away from that and create homeostasis in your life and create spaciousness for integration and reflection. We're always, quote unquote, doing the work. It's always meaning we're in it, but we don't have to be so active in it all the time. Give yourself reprieve. Yeah. Because sometimes you need to step back enough to see and acknowledge the work that you've done. I equate this to like a video game. Life is like a video game. You're only able to progress from level 1 to level 2 when the game, life, acknowledges that you have done all the things. You've beaten the last enemy. You've accumulated the new weapons and all the gold and all of that, and now you can move on to level 2, right? But new level, new devil, bigger challenges now, right? But you got to give yourself, you've got to acknowledge that, pat yourself on the back, take a moment to celebrate. And sometimes that moment is a few seconds, sometimes it's a few days, sometimes it's a few weeks. Being that, and then cycle back through. Life is cyclical. Don't be so linear, because then you're going to just identify and define yourself by being in intensity all the time. And that can be too much for so many people, and too much for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's something Mercedes and I really struggle with, is always looking for, we're always in our magician archetype. We're always looking for the hidden meaning behind, you know, what's going on and what's really at the root of something. So
yeah,
it's nice to just sometimes just let it be something simple.
Have fun, play, be childlike. I read something the other day. It was, you know, we were all looking for someone to grow old with, but what we really need is someone that we can continue to be a child with, or childlike with, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but that's sort of where life's at. Be a kid for as long as you can, as often as you can.
Yeah. That playtime, that reprieve, that rest is so important. And just, I need to write it on my mirror, like rest and integrate, like stop all the seeking. It does become a bit of an addiction. All right, Steph. So we need to jump into this lightning round with you real quick. And the first question I have is, if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
You know, keep listening to, keep hearing that voice within that is telling you it is different, because it is different.
If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
Geez, that's a great question.
It's always the hardest one.
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, one of the books that really changed my life was Living with the Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. So, you know, that was and I read that when I was like, I must have been 19. So it was a pretty profound book for me back then. Maybe it's something worth mentioning here.
Yeah, absolutely. If it came to you, then it's worth mentioning for sure. All right. If you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, or at least everyone listening right now, what would it be?
Be willing to go where your heart is calling you to go, yet you know that there's a fear there. Just be willing.
Yeah.
That's good. Before we let you go, where can people find you online?
Yeah, sure. At Stefanos Sifandos on social media, and stefanossifandos.com for my website, or growwithsteph.com.
Yeah.
STEF.
Love that. We highly recommend your work. We have just been absorbing as much of it as we can ourselves, like I said earlier, and we hope our listeners go and do the same. But I will write on my mirror, rest and integrate some of it, because otherwise I'll just live in there like, save that, send that to you, save this. But thank you so much for the work you're doing, Steph, and being such a light in the world. And we really appreciate what you're bringing here. So grateful for you.
Appreciate you both.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steph. So we will send you all this stuff. We'll send you a promo we'll make for this. And of course, we'll let you know when this airs, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks, Jade. The schedule for this?
Next Monday.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, just send it all to Jill. She'll promote through all the networks. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, ladies.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the time. Glad you beat it.
Thank you. Likewise.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's see. Are we still all right? I like when he talked about like finding someone you could be a child with. I had heard on something I had listened to of his, that when he is arguing with his wife and he realizes that he's just like not being who he wants himself to be, he'll like jump into plow position, a yoga position, to like,
which is like your butt is like literally upside down in the air. It's the most vulnerable position you could be in. It's not like downward dog. It's like the reverse of downward dog, right? Like butt.
Yeah, it's like
air overhead.
So it's like becoming all of a sudden like, okay, here I am being a fool, like my butt's in the air and being an ass, whatever.
Literally.
But I love, like, I was trying to think, first of all, for all of our listeners, someone's edging their grass outside. So I'm sorry for the noise that you'll experience in the last 10 minutes of this show. But I was trying to think of myself when I am being an ass to my boyfriend. I'm so caught up in that when it hits me that I'm being an ass, then I get caught up in the shame of it. And there's no way that I could then get in that position because I'm already so embarrassed of myself. So I wish I had asked him about the process in his head, but I guess it's more just, first of all, humility and
humility,
not caring. Yeah.
Well, caring so much, about the factor of the relationship,
like not caring about being a fool in the moment, like
it's
for the sake of love.
It's like the biggest test you could give to yourself to show up in that moment, like the biggest challenge you could give to yourself. Like, can you show up for yourself so much that even though it feels like there's a big barrier of shame in between you and doing that silly pose or, making yourself vulnerable in the middle of shame, if you can break through that, imagine what that proves to yourself. Like, holy shit, I did the hardest
really like to. It's a very Maddie Moon like practice,
totally.
And I would really like to be able to do it. And if anyone listening knows my boyfriend, it would work very well for him. So if I'm going to do it with anyone, he's the one, because he's someone who would actually do that himself. I've talked about how, when we're both in a rut, he'll grab me and tickle me and tell me, say you're sorry. And then, we're both laughing. So
instead of the trigger stage.
Yeah. But anyways, those were not the magic tricks. My actual magic trick
was pretty magical though.
Yeah.
I'll say.
But the one that I have planned is, it's a practice that Stefanos and his wife lead couples through that I heard them share before, where you are, first of all, you do, one of the breath works that you can purchase on their site, or you can just do breath work together. And then you answer these questions one at a time. So the question is, when I look at you, I see, and then you answer. So when I look at you, I see my forever or my family, my home, whatever it is. When you look at me, I think you see, and this can be really vulnerable for people because it can be where your low self-worth comes out. When you look at me, I want you to see. And then when I feel most, and by the way, the partner's not saying anything. They're just holding space. They're just eye contact. Eye contact's really important here, and matching the breath.
Okay.
So then the last three is, when I feel most alone is maybe when you storm out of the room after an argument. When I feel most angry, when I feel most sad. And the important part is that the partner listening is having empathy through stillness, not through replies, but through stillness, because it gives the partner permission to fully go there because they're just receiving. So yeah, that's my magic trick, pulled from Stefanos and his wife.
I love that. So you sit eye to eye, and then you deliver that information
after doing some breath work where your breath is matching. Yeah.
Okay. And then do you swap?
Yeah. Then you swap.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you swap and go through the same thing and both just hold space. And afterward, do you know if they recommend like replying at all? Because you always
I'm sure you can, but in that container, in that set container, the purpose is to just hold space through stillness. They emphasize stillness and just receiving.
Yeah. Okay. So my magic today is relationship green flag.
Sorry, 1 second. Because even a face, I want to clarify, even a face expression can cause the partner who's relaying the message to hold back some of their truth.
I see.
So it's stillness, just breathing, no wincing of the eyes, no curl of the lip, nothing, just perfect stillness. It's because that's what makes the partner feel they can go as far as needed,
Okay.
But, okay. So go on to yours.
That is a bit of a challenge, I suppose.
Yeah, I know.
But a good practice. Okay. So my magic today is also coming from Steph, and this is specifically taken from his Instagram, actually. And he he kind of delineated red flags, relationship red flags and relationship green flags, but he did it in a way, I mean, we've all heard of relationship red flags, of course, but probably not many green flags. He did it in a way that I feel like is much more articulate and concise than some of the places you might see this type of information. So the relationship red flags is where I'll start. And he says, here are some of the red flags to look for. Can't stop telling you how perfect you are. Highly judgmental of others. Are highly sarcastic. Complain a great deal. Can only see the negative in challenge. Is challenge averse. Back-to-back relationships. Has an unhealthy relationship with parents. Is selfish of their resources like time, money, and wisdom. Too intense, too quick. Addictions are present, so like pornography, alcohol, love, sex, drugs, etc. And unwilling to do the work together. So with the red flags, he says that it's all about really consistency, and that it can kind of, consistency is a thing that can reinforce a sense of calmness and safety, or it can fortify undesirable behavior. But these red flags I thought were like, whoo, like I was reading them, I was like, damn, I still have some of these, but I definitely had a lot of these moving into my most recent relationship, my marriage. So it was interesting to see that. And then of course, like, obviously you're going to go and look through and go like, did my partner have any of these? Do they still hold any of these? Are we working through stuff together and on our own as well? Okay. And then relationship green flags, which was also nice to have this as the positive highlight. You can see where you balance.
I'm sure we all resonate with one of those red flags.
Sure.
I know for me, my humor can be very sarcastic. So I need to look at just maybe the attitude behind it. Is it playful or is it passive aggressive?
Yeah, that's the important thing for sure. Okay. And then green flags. So he says, here's the green flag list. Practices self-care and hygiene, introspective and thoughtful, has healthy boundaries, self-sufficient, demonstrates gratitude with ease, consistent in their word, has rich, meaningful, and open friendships, financially adept, healthy in body, ability to listen intently to those with a differing opinion, demonstrates a capacity to be vulnerable. So these green flags are essentially, they mean that, there's a feeling of safety to proceed here, right? To explore and to create deeper vulnerability and openness and curiosity within the relationship. Those green flags is what makes it apparent that your guard is down or the partner's guard is down, and we're ready to not only show the better parts of ourselves, but perhaps even be able to accept all the good from the partner and the bad so that they can work through the bad too. So green flags, red flags, hopefully you have been able to identify some of those in yourself, maybe even in your partner, but you can only work on your side of the street, y'all, if you're listening. So. And if you're not in a relationship yet, those are always great to know what you're bringing to a relationship and what someone might be bringing to a relationship if you're deciding to enter one with them.
And if you are listening and you hear the red flags and think like, damn, that describes my relationship, have hope, because I would have felt that way almost my entire 20s and, half of my 30s. And now I can honestly listen to what Mercedes is saying, and my relationship makes up the green flags. So, it did take switching. It did take switching my partner, but just have hope that, you're not stuck there.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest ones on the green flag, or I think it's actually on the red flag list, it says is not willing to do work together. If you guys are able to do work together, you're going to be able to turn a lot of those red flags into green flags. But if that is not in there, then you might want to reconsider what's the situation. And that goes for yourself as well. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't want to do the work, I don't want to see a therapist, I don't want to, look at any of these modalities that might help, I'm fine. Then maybe check out the definition of narcissism.
And speaking about doing the work, guys, as a reminder, If you're interested in joining our men's workshop, Awakening the King Within, where we give you all the insights for how to integrate into a true king, where we teach you how to attract women to your life and know how to fully turn them on, and where we get you clear on your goal, life, direction, and purpose, please go to awakeningkings.com to register for the course and to learn more about it if you're intrigued.
Yes. And by the way, I also want to confront a question we've been getting asked about our private one-on-one, or I guess two-on-ones, this Jade and I with one of y'all, the sessions that we've mentioned offering in conjunction with our men's workshop. So these private sessions with us will only be offered to the kings who graduate our Awakening the King Within men's workshop. And just wanted to make that known, because we've been getting a lot of questions about it, but also we're so thrilled about the men joining us for their journey to the throne. And I hope if you're listening to this and it calls to you, that you take the invitation and join us for that. Make use of the invitation. We're ready, and we have open arms. So let's do it together, kings.
Yeah. All right, Magic Mobbers, thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey with us. If this episode held some magic for you, please share it with your friends and family. This would mean so much to us. And don't forget to join us on our Instagram page at The Magic Hour and let us know what your favorite episodes have been so far. We appreciate all of your feedback and want to know what's lighting you up.
Yes. And don't forget to rate and review us. Like Jade said, if you leave us a review, that always lights up our day. We send it back and forth to each other, these reviews when they come through. And of course, the 5 stars is what helps Apple Podcasts know to show this episode to others, and increase our reach. So we release a new episode every Monday, so you can catch us again next week or go listen to some of our past episodes in our podcast library. We'll meet you there. Until then,
be a light.